Starting. Okay, that's it. We're broadcasting to ourselves at the moment, but to everybody else when they join in. Hi, everybody. If you're watching this, I'm joined today by Mr. Lee Moore. If you're not aware who Mr. Lee Moore is, he's the guy who's organising the Atheist Conference, which you may know as the one where Steve Shives will actually be attending in person. He'll actually be there, and there's some controversy linked to that. I'd just like to apologise to the people that are watching right now that I've got my Nephilim-free headphones on, so I'll just get that line in there before anybody else gets that in. And that's a bit of a sort of old school YouTube atheist joke, that, with these headphones. So Lee, hi, welcome.
Good morning.
And thank you for joining me so early on in the day. Now, what I'd like to discuss with you, Lee, everybody I think would like to know about the stuff with regard to the YouTube panel. But on top of that, I'd like to know a little bit about you and sort of how you got started in this, how you got into atheist activism, because I know that you do a lot of activism offline as well as the things that you do online. Know a little bit about the conference and maybe then talk about atheist movements first before we move on to the controversial stuff, I suppose. So what's your kind of life story in a nutshell, really? You know, not in real time, but in a nutshell.
I can summarize it a little bit. I was born in the Southeast in a very religious part of the Bible Belt. My family is very religious, and it always seemed absolutely ridiculous to me. And the idea that someone could be apart from the church or apart from that community they had was unheard of. That was just not the way people lived, but I never wanted anything to do with it. I knew a lot of other people didn't want anything to do with it, but you couldn't leave the community. You couldn't leave the church. As I got older, of course, I completely rebelled against it all through my teenage years. And I paid the price for it, too. I was assaulted, attacked by very religious people who thought I worshiped Satan. And I'm like, no, I don't believe in him either. Have fun with that, though. But yeah, in my early 20s, I became a bit of a political activist. I did a lot of work against the neo-Nazi and KKK movements in the Southeast. And when I noticed there actually was a new atheist movement, for lack of a better term, I jumped on with reckless abandon, and I've been with it ever since.
Yeah, that's interesting. And one thing that's interesting, because I know I'd watched a couple of hangouts that you'd had with Steve, and you talked about the fact that you'd grown up in the South. And one of the things a point that I've made, and I suppose you may have some first-hand knowledge of this, is that I made the point that with regard to atheist movements, that if you become too politically exclusive, that maybe you're not able to give the help necessarily to the people that need the help. For example, that you may have people that are in the position that you were in. I don't know how things have worked out for you with your other sort of socio-political views, but there will be people who their views on things like homosexuality or the status of women will be tied up with their religious views, and they won't necessarily lose all those on the same day. And that if you take obviously take a hardline stance on behavior at a conference or whatever, that goes without saying, right? But a hardline stance on sort of what people you're prepared to associate with, and maybe some of those people that most need your support, because it isn't the atheists that are living in New York that need support, it's the atheists that are living in more religious environments, that maybe you're closing the door on the people that need your help the most. You know, a little bit like saying, well, we're going to give assistance to Muslim refugees, but only if they've got the right opinions on homosexuality or on Jews or something like that. So I just wondered what you thought about that.
Muslim refugees or any religious folks. Other groups that do a lot of work with helping out people that are religious in bad situations. Nobody's helping out the atheists, so that's more of our focus. But you're right in saying that getting too political or having a hardline political stance does damage the movements. For us, the sweet spot in politics is taking the issues that are religiously motivated. So abortion rights. We're very much pro-choice, pro-abortion, because it's the religious lunatics out there that are saying abortion should be banned. So we take the counter stance and say it should not be up to you. It should be up to a secular state to decide that. And as far as we're concerned, yeah, abortion should be legal. But we go through issues like that. We're even picking up death with dignity now, because it's the very religious that are saying that assisted suicide for terminally ill patients that are suffering is just not acceptable because it's against God's wishes. Well, we're saying under secular law, it should be your choice. You should have that freedom, that right. So the trick is not to get into directly conservative or directly liberal issues. Like, we steer clear of economics as best we can, though all of us have very strong opinions on it. So yeah, the more political you get, the more you take a side, the more you do alienate folks on that have a different point of view.
And I think that was the concern that some of us had. I don't know how involved you were with sort of YouTube Atheism Online with the Atheism Plus days, but they had kind of sort of hardline stance, which was effectively, if you weren't online weren't on board with us with all these different social issues, then we don't want you at our conferences. And that seemed to be the sort of approach that Skepticon went down, and it's certainly its attendance figures don't seem to have done very good on the back of that. But my position was there. I mean, obviously, it's certainly where you have, I suppose, this is a sort of a kind of intersectionality, like the feminists would talk about intersectionality of being a Muslim, being black, being a woman, and all this, like where these things intersect. You've got these intersections here of these different things, and I can understand taking a stance on that. I just feel that there's a differentiation to be made between taking a stance and, well, this is our position, and saying to people, well, if that isn't your explicit position as well, you're not welcome here. You know, you've got to be on board with all these issues, otherwise we don't want to associate ourselves with you.
Well, I remember the Atheism Plus fiasco. I was around in those days. I was not involved, but I did watch it. And I was very much very critical of it, because all it really did was serve to divide the community more. We were very young in those days, the community itself. We were very fledgling here in the States. We had a lot more growth to do before we could start asking those kinds of questions, like, what else do we stand for? What else do we want to unite under? We hadn't built a firm foundation to even get to that point. So they jumped the gun on that, and we all paid the price. A lot of people left the movement on both sides when we should have all stuck together to a degree. And yeah, maybe a libertarian over there disagrees with me on this one economic issue, or maybe a hardcore liberal over here disagrees with me on some economic issue. We're all down for the separation of church and state. We should come together at least on that. And then once we've won that fight, then we go on.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I'd agree with you. I think probably singing from the same sort of hymn sheet, ironically, on that particular one. That's interesting, because one of the things you brought on then was to do with the separation of church and state. I know that's something that's really, really important to you guys over in the United States. And the whole business of having an atheist movement, could you perhaps explain to me, because it's a different perspective that we have in England, especially a little bit different in Northern Ireland, different in the Republic of Ireland as well, where there is an atheist Ireland, atheist Northern Ireland. We've never had the equivalent in England. We have a National Secular Society and a British Humanist Association, but we never have an explicitly atheist body, and we've never had one. You know, and we've seen these changes. The levels of religiosity have dropped now to a state where a couple of years ago, a survey showed that only 32% of people in the United Kingdom now believe there's a God. So, you know, it's dropped a long, long way without that. But obviously the situation is very different in the United States. So could you just explain that to me a little bit?
Well, I'm definitely aware that the situation in England and Great Britain in general is incredibly different. You guys never had to fight the war. We're in the middle of it. So those crazy preachers that you see on standing on soapboxes and megaphones in parks, I'm sure you guys have those, right?
To some extent, it's a much more. I mean, it happens just in the big cities. It's not something that you'd see, I don't think, as widespread as you do.
Well, those same people,
we do have them. Yeah.
Those same people that you guys have spouting crazy shit in parks. Those are the ones that run our country. Those are the ones that hold elected positions. Those are our lawmakers. And yes, we are. Probably, it's estimated that 30% of the United States doesn't really hold a religion or a belief, or is wishy-washy on the idea of God. Over 40% are so devoutly religious that it's terrifying, actually. Believe the literal word of God. Believe that evolution is a liberal myth or a scam by Satan. Like, that is the culture we have. Those are our voters. Those are our politicians. So of course we need to do something to stand up about that. A lot of states have been trying to push their version of Christianity as a state religion. It gets shot down every time, but they keep trying, and eventually they might get it. So the problem with us is our lawmakers are doing what their voters tell them to do, which is being so religious it's not funny. Vote and put laws that support biblical law, that support biblical ideas, and kill all the Muslims.
Yeah, I mean, maybe one of the differences I know, because I look at a lot of the stats in the UK. It's something I do videos on, is the situation in the UK, and I follow all the surveys that are done. Is that kind of interesting one? Is I know that in the United States that there's a lot of value for a politician as being shown to be religious, whereas actually a survey was done a couple of years ago in the UK, which actually showed the opposite, that even amongst Christians, they showed a higher degree of trust in politicians who didn't make religious claims than those who did. So maybe that's part of the difference. I mean, certainly with regard to the separation of church and state, which is something that we don't have. I mean, we do have a state religion in the United Kingdom, and we do have some issues with regard. One of them is with regard to faith schools, publicly funded. About a third of our publicly funded schools are run, in actual fact, by the Church of England or the Catholic Church, which is something that just couldn't happen in the United States.
Actually, it does happen. It happens all the time, thanks to a lot of red states voucher programs. Religious faith-based schools are now being funded by public tax dollars.
Right. Okay.
And direct violation of the separation of church and state, which, as I said, we have it in the books, but in practice, in some places it's held up, but in others, no, it's just flat out ignored, and every attempt to fight it almost always fails.
So this is obviously why you feel that having an atheist movement that's fertile and out there, getting your message across is important. I know that you've said that you see that it's dying. What's been your experience of that?
Well, in 2012, we all got together and did this little thing called the Reason Rally in Washington, D.C. And I think the Parks and Rec Service at the D.C. lawn said there were estimated up to 30,000 people that were on the lawn that day for that event. And some of those were, of course, probably tourists, had nothing to do with us, but there were a lot of us there. That was our peak, our heyday. Like, we all came together. It was a great event. Everyone had a great time. Atheism was in the air. 4 years later, 2016, there was another Reason Rally, and attendance was down to about 6,000 to 7,000 total. People were calling for its boycotts within the atheist community. The atheist movement is in decline because the atheists in the movement either have left it, don't want to be a part of it, or are actively trying to take it down because it doesn't support whatever ideological claim they're running with. So it's an ongoing issue, and it's something that we're trying to alleviate or do a little something about.
Yeah. I mean, I think from what I recall, as things started to fragment, I would have said it was probably about 2012, start of 2013, as I saw it. I'm not somebody that's attended events, but I've seen a lot of this online, and of the people that were speaking at the events getting involved as these kinds of splits occurred. And it seemed to me that there were sort of two kinds of splits. There was one type of person that didn't want to attend these events because they didn't like the atmosphere. It was all full of sexual assault and, all these horrific tales of these things happening, and women aren't safe there and ethnic minorities aren't safe there. But then another group of people who looked at all of this and thought, it just doesn't sound fun anymore. And I'm not saying that the only thing that's fun is assaulting people or anything like that, but it made it sound like the kind of, like you wouldn't be going and enjoying the event. You'd just be watching every word that you were saying, that you don't say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. It sounded more of a drudge than something that you would want to attend anymore. So it seemed to me like both sides were sort of effectively going to end up cold to the same event, but for very different reasons.
Yes, I remember those days too. There were a lot of calls like, we have to do something about the sexual assaults at these atheist cons. And I took a hard look at the data, and yeah, there were actually quite a numerous amount of sexual assaults at atheist cons, but no more than any other type of con out there, even Christian cons, Dragon Con or Comic Con or any of the other like big conventions out there. Yeah, when people get drunk, someone's going to be an asshole in all likelihood, and maybe someone will get hurt. That is a reality we face. And we've looked at what the others have done to do something about this problem, and they've had great success. The atheist community actually took note. And from my understanding, sexual assaults at atheist conventions these days are pretty rare, thanks to the number of security procedures that have been put in place.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was a problem that did make us look like, well, we're problematic, we're horrible. But it was a problem everybody had. And it was a problem we collectively needed to deal with, because that is something that is horrifically wrong. That is something that should not happen. But these days, like I said, the problem, well, I'm sure there are still cases. I don't hear about them as much anymore, but I'm sure it still does happen to some degree. There are procedures, there are ways to get around, there are ways to stop it that didn't exist back in 2011, 2012. So progress has been made. And as far as the community not being fun anymore, yeah, they're absolutely right. Actually, most of the atheist conventions or conferences I've been to were just fucking boring. Now, I just got back from one last night. I was a speaker for a group called Black Nonbelievers. They were doing a convention at sea, or a 5-day cruise through the Caribbean, and it was the most fun atheist con I've ever been to.
I'm not surprised if it was a 5-day.
We're all having fun. Our atheism, and we're getting our drink on, and everyone's having a great time. And these are the kind of lessons that I think the atheist community needs to learn, that the social aspect, which has been grossly neglected in the past, because let's face it, the people running the cons are, well, dinosaurs, for lack of a better term. They just don't get it. They don't know how to get younger folks out, and it's a lesson learned, and it's something we are improving.
Yeah, and so this is something then, obviously you've got quite a lot of experience of going to these events, and this must be a motivating factor then in you organizing this atheist conference, which is taking place at the start of, is it July next year?
The 8th of 2018. You can buy your tickets at theatheistconference.com right now.
I think I have a picture somewhere of your page, actually. So if you want to tell us a little bit about it, I'll see if I can throw that up. If you want to tell us a little bit about the event, you know, and why people should attend, because I know that I've listened to you talk about it now several times, and I must admit, reservations to one side with regards to the YouTube panel, which we'll get onto in due course. It does sound, to me, it sounds like a worthy event, and it sounds like quite a dynamic event with quite a lot of things going on.
Of course. Well, let's start with the genesis, for lack of a better term, of TAC. We call it TAC, the Atheist Conference. I love fun acronyms that you can say instead of list out each letter. But yeah, so the genesis of TAC, it came about because we're in New York. We are not the problem. We have a firm separation of church and state here. We've got a very vibrant and well-adjusted atheist community that's growing every day. We don't look at ourselves as in the shit. We're not under siege. We're not under attack. We have a very secular government here. But the rest of the country doesn't necessarily enjoy that safety and privilege that we have. So what can we do as New Yorkers? We've got one of the wealthiest cities on earth in our backyard. What can we do to use the resources here to help change things in other parts of the country? So we came up with a way to not only do a fundraiser, but put on an event like the atheist community has never seen before. And we called it TAC. The idea is every dollar we raise that we don't need to put on the next TAC in 2019, every dollar donated to us will go into a fund, something we call the Godless Grant Program. And those funds are to be allocated to small groups, specifically in states where the separation of church and state just doesn't exist anymore, to give them resources they need for specific projects. We're not just cutting them a check and letting them run. Specific projects that will elevate their group and help the fight for the separation of church and state. So that's been the big point of it. What can we do to help? So TAC is all about let's help the community outside of our borders.
Yeah, and some of the things you're talking about, I know with Steve Shives on one of his hangouts, you're talking about there's quite a lot of different events. There's the main speakers that you have, but then there are going to be other workshops and things, and also, as you said, some arts and science events.
Yeah, we're doing an art and science expo. The art expo is going to be featuring secular works of art from artists within and outside of our community. Some will be for sale if you want to buy them, but we'll have our own gallery. And the science expo, local scientists will be showing off some of their work, and we're also doing a technology expo where we're going to be showcasing some interactive exhibits for people to experience. I can't go into too much detail on that because we're still dotting our I's and crossing our T's on that one, but it will not be something you would ever want to miss. But we're also focusing a lot on the social aspects. Instead of just sitting in an auditorium listening to dry speaker after dry speaker, which we're actually not having any dry speakers. I want everyone to have a little fun with it. We're setting up lounges where people can go and socialize and network, and spaces where people could just talk, meet each other. Those are always my favorite experiences at atheist cons. It's just meeting people, talking, making new friends, networking, or finding out that there's someone I really can't stand. I enjoy that. So I want to share that experience with everyone else, and I want to make that one of the big things we do.
Yeah, and I would think that necessarily, I mean, when you these kind of things that you're going to be sponsoring, hopefully let's assume that you get a decent amount of money from this to put towards these things in these more red states, in these more traditional hardcore religious states. I think necessarily this is why your event has to have a more broad church approach. I think you would agree, because the people that are going to be involved in those atheist communities, because I understand it's different. It's very different in the UK in that irreligiosity is actually pretty evenly spread on the left and the right. The right wing, by dint of being a little bit more conservative, a slightly more, a few percent more likely to affiliate with Christianity. But in terms of actually belief in God, it's almost identical on each side. That's different in America, isn't it?
Oh, so, yeah. The Republican Party pretty much is the Jesus Party.
Yeah, so you really can't run an event that shuns, if you're on the right, you're not welcome at this event, because then you can't bring these other groups on board, can you, to do these?
Well, we've done a lot of outreach. At least I've seen other groups do a lot of outreach to the more right-wing side of the world, and have been pretty much had the door shut in their face. Yes, most of the atheists in the States are much more on the centrist or liberal side of the political spectrum, and that's all well and good, because most of the issues that we fight for in the separation of church and states, it's the conservatives that are trying to abolish them and the liberals that are trying to stand for them. Yeah. So I guess in that way we do have a liberal slant, but only on those issues, only because the conservative parties, the Jesus parties, want these particular issues to come out in favor of their God. So I don't think they're conservative issues inherently. I don't think they're liberal issues. I think they're human rights issues, and that's more of the political line that I take.
Yeah. So okay, shall we move on and talk about the whole Steve Shives thing? Because what had triggered this off was that I had made a video, a little bit tongue-in-cheek. The Mythicist Milwaukee thing had happened, and there was a lot of kind of fallout as a result of that. And then I'd heard Steve Shives mention in a video that he was appearing at this event that you'd organised, and from my perspective, I found it kind of ironic that you got a very a figure in Sargon of Akkad who causes a lot of ill will, and pulls people apart effectively, and he polarizes people, I think is the word I'm looking for. And so his feet were to be held to the fire. So I made a bit of a sort of tongue-in-cheek video suggesting the same thing. Is the same thing going to happen with Steve Shives? Because he's the same kind of polarizing character who's had the same effect. So I'd made that then. I think somebody linked, who's friends with you, had linked it on Facebook, and you'd seen the post.
I think that was Corey. Shout out to Corey.
Yeah. Pardon?
I said shout out to Corey. I think he was the one who linked.
Yes, it was. Yes, Corey. Yeah. And so that's what got us talking. And then you made a few comments. I made a video on those comments because I didn't know I'd have the chance to do. Well, I didn't know that you would be able to have afford me the time, because it's tough.
Oh, I'll talk to anybody. I don't care.
So yeah, I'd made a second video on this, but it's great now to have a chance to clear this up. What I didn't know when I'd made this second video is that effectively, then I saw a hangout that you'd had back with Steve in, I think, May or June or something like that, and it became clear to me, sort of it clarified a few points, which was that what had happened was, I knew from what Steve had said that he was on a YouTube panel with Christy Winters, Foxy Jezebel, and the one janitor, and that was what I knew. What I didn't know is that you had gone to Steve and asked Steve to create this panel. So what I didn't understand was that you'd made some comments to me, okay, about, I've got them written down here. I really just care about showing diversity of thought amongst folks who still care about the fact that there is no God. And it kind of seemed to me that if what you wanted to represent was diversity of thought, regardless of what you think about Steve as a person, regardless of whether you agree with all his views, he's still got to be just about the worst person that you could pick to organize a YouTube panel, because he's effectively made himself sort of persona non grata to like 99% or 95%, let's not exaggerate, 95% of the YouTube atheist community, because he's just not prepared to engage with people. So, I mean, literally the only panel that he could create for you is a panel of his friends.
Pretty much. And I was okay with that. So I was perfectly fine with that. Let me tell you a little something about Steve that I think a lot of people don't really understand. And I've been friends with Steve for a very long time. I did some YouTube atheist work maybe like 10 years ago, and Steve did like a guest post on our show. It doesn't exist anymore, so otherwise I'd let you go look at it. It was back when he was Steve Likes to Curse. And I fell out of contact with him for a while. And then when we were starting to put all this tax stuff together, I wanted to find a YouTube atheist to help put this panel together, whatnot. And I looked back at who was around. I saw TJ Kurt, or The Amazing Atheist isn't even The Amazing Atheist anymore. I couldn't find for the life of me a way to get a hold of Thunderfoots. I tried a lot of people, and I also wanted to reach out to Steve because he was an old friend, an old acquaintance, and we worked well together. And I did, and then I started looking into like some of the things that he's been going through, and I made a really interesting determination. While he is not the most popular YouTube atheist, he is certainly the most well-known YouTube atheist. And that's kind of that's on the fault of all of you guys. You guys continually put out like the glorious destruction of Steve Shives videos like every other week. Like I googled or searched for Steve Shives on YouTube, and just hundreds of these videos from so many people bashing Steve Shives came up. I'm like, he really is the most well-known YouTube atheist out there. He understands. Almost all of you have been saying that, well, he won't engage with us, he won't talk to us, he won't debate with us. He's got us all blocked because he subscribed to a block bot, and none of that really concerns. If someone doesn't want to engage with other people that disagree with them, that's on them. That's fine. I don't want to argue with everybody and their brother all the time. It become a full-time job that I don't get paid for, because I say a lot of very controversial things like there is no God. So if that's the way Steve wants to run it, that's on Steve. But he is one of the most well-known YouTube atheists. Our entire community has heard of him, good and bad, and they all want to talk to him. They all want to meet him. They all want to hear what he has to say. So if someone has something that they have to, that people want to hear, why would I hold back on that? That's
yeah. I mean, I wouldn't argue with that fact. I mean, I think you're right, but that's because that is because my response to that is because he's a controversial figure. In actual fact, Steve isn't one of the most well-known YouTube atheists because he's an atheist. It's because of his views on other subjects, but also on his behavior and attitudes towards other people, and his attitudes towards other people that he disagrees with. So my response to you would be that as somebody who would feature as part of that panel, who would be an interesting person to have at your event, I'd absolutely agree with you. I'd absolutely be on board with that. But as somebody who you would enable to try and to create a panel that is diverse of thought. And you said to me, yes, the more conservative YouTube atheists were not invited, as we are a non-partisan event, and those more conservative ones stopped talking about atheism. So I understand that you're not saying we're not inviting conservatives because it's non-partisan. We're only going to invite left-wing liberals because that would obviously be nonsense. You mean that the conservative ones don't talk about atheism anymore? So you wanted a panel of YouTube atheists that talk about atheism, and there were, to me, there were people like TMM, the Messianic Manic, people like King Crocoduck, for example, who's a great YouTuber, who said on Twitter he would love to have been part of this panel if he'd been invited. Yeah, he's a great channel, a centrist. This is the thing. These are centrists. Logic, Jacqueline Glenn. These are people that are very well known, but who talk about atheism. Whilst there are people on this panel like Foxy Jezebel and the One Janitor. I mean, like Foxy Jezebel, the last video that I could find where she mentions atheism is 5 years ago. It doesn't seem to fit in with the remit that you'd given.
Well, let me jump in because you made a lot of points for us to discuss.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So, some of the ones you've mentioned, like I said, I've never heard of. When I wanted to put this panel together, I had not been a part of the YouTube atheist community for a long time because I watched it kind of go downhill. And then I was just like, well, I'm already an atheist, so I don't need to watch all these videos. And occasionally, like I would watch one of Steve's Star Trek videos because I love Star Trek and that's kind of fun. But most of my YouTube interests had nothing to do with atheism or politics. It was other things that I like. So I did not know what I was getting into. I didn't know what the world looked like. And from a cursory glance, it didn't seem like there was much out there. But Steve was still doing it. And Foxy Jezebel lives up here in New York. She's a friend of mine, and she was all about it. I didn't see a problem with it at all, and I don't see why there is a problem. I work with the people that I know that can get the job done. And as far as diversity of thought, though, the conference itself will be showcasing diversity of thought. But not every panel has to be completely across the board. Like we got the left, we got the right, we got the center, we got people who think this or that. Not every panel has to do that. Not every single individual aspect. When it comes to YouTube atheism, like I said, I don't know all these other YouTube atheists. I've already put the panel together, and by put the panel together, I gave it to Steve and said, Steve, put the panel together, and he did. And now we have a panel. There will be other panels. There will be other speakers we're even looking to. And I'm not opposed to having another YouTube atheist speak at our conference that won't be on that panel. We've got a lot of other slots open. We're adding speakers all the time. So that's really a non-issue to me. We don't need diversity of thought on everything. We just need it across the board for the conference.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people, though, on YouTube would, and I know they'll be, as they're watching, listening to you say that, what they'll be saying is the same thing that I'm thinking, which is that this is supposed to be a panel that is representing us in many ways, and it's no more representative than if you picked the people right at the other end of the spectrum and just solely had a panel made up of them. I mean, you made a comment, I know, with Steve, where you said something like, what you'd like to do, what you'd love to have is to be able to get him and Thunderfoot in the same room to shake hands. And I don't know if you recall making that comment back in a Hangout.
Yeah. No, I do. And
the biggest obstacle for that is Steve. It's nothing other than Steve, because Steve is the one person that cannot, he's like God God cannot abide sin, the slightest little sin. And Steve is very much like the sort of human incarnation of that. He can't abide being sort of in the same room as anybody that isn't on board with him on 99% of issues. And so it just seems like...
Let me right in on that. And I hate to speak on behalf of Steve, because Steve can fight his own battles if he wants to, but put yourself in Steve's shoes. You're a guy who made atheist YouTube videos, and yeah, you're a feminist, and you've got some very interesting beliefs. Some I agree with, some I don't, but you're still a decent guy. And all these other YouTube atheists are making these attack videos about you, calling you a cuck or attacking your wife. I mean, no wonder he doesn't want to engage with anybody on the other side, because he sees all of you guys as just asshole threatening douchebags who incite a lot of harassment and harm to him and his. So no, I can't get a YouTube panel that's going to have diversity of thought, because yeah, Steve and their side, they don't want to talk to the folks on the other side. They don't want to engage. They don't want anything to do, because they see the other side as a nest of sort of hate and attack and horrible shit. And they make a good point. So, I mean, while I'm a kind of person that just loves to pick a fight, especially an intellectual one, not a physical one, I swear I'm skinny and small, don't hurt me. But I'll engage with everyone. Not everyone is like me. And a lot of people want to be left alone, left to their own devices, and that's fine. Now, as far as this panel representing all of YouTube atheism, it's not. I mean, saying it would be an absolute lie. It does not represent the entire atheist YouTube community. There cannot be a panel that represents the entire atheist YouTube community, because you guys don't play ball together. You don't play well together. You don't play long. And whether, even if you, Mr. Plum, would engage with them on a panel, they wouldn't with you. So if I want to have the most well-known atheist YouTuber out there, I've got to have him and his friends. And if they're going to put out a message that is positive, that is uplifting, that is inspirational to others, then more power to them. That's what I want. I don't want the back and forth, he said, she said, hate shit going on a panel of civilized people. That interview between Thomas Smith and Sargon of Akkad, that is the last thing I want. That was a complete shit show. I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. So yeah, what we're doing, it's not representing the entire atheist YouTube community. But this is year one of TAC. Year two might be different. We'll see how year one.
What I would say to that is, first off, with regard to sort of Steve not wanting to talk to people that have made comments about his wife and all this kind of thing, Yeah, absolutely, no problem with that. But it isn't as far. That sounds like the way that Steve Shives would describe it. I mean, that describes maybe a 25-30% of the people that Steve doesn't talk to. There are lots of people. I was friends with Steve on Facebook, friends. I could see his tweets on Twitter, and before I'd made a video about him, he'd blocked me and all that jazz, and that's happened with quite a number of people. But just to look beyond that, you know, about not being able to get on. Surely the point is, I mean, if it's having people on a panel that can't get on. You could have had a panel of left-wing, right-wing, and centrist YouTubers, YouTube atheists that talk about atheism, that would disagree on some of these issues, but would be doing exactly what you're saying in your brief, which is putting those issues to one side. Whereas instead, what you've done, as you've just said now, is you've chosen a group of people that aren't willing to do that. Why? Because they place other issues above and beyond the issues that this conference is about. And maybe I could understand you not wanting the kind of shit show that's happened with Sargon of Akkad of Mythicist Milwaukee, but that didn't have to be like that. They could have had a discussion. This is the thing. It was like, this is how I've described it in a video. Let's turn it into it. Let's make it a shit show, and then we can stand back and go, ha, it was a shit show, because they didn't have to discuss the things that they discussed. They could have, I mean, the whole business of mythicism and what relevant Sargon of Akkad has to that is another issue. I don't think he was a relevant guest whatsoever. But they could have discussed issues. They could have asked him about, if it was an atheist event, they could have asked him about his atheism. They could have asked him about his views in relation to whether Jesus actually existed, or what he thinks of Christianity, or any of these different things, you know. But instead, they had a very antagonistic approach of, let's hold his feet to the fire and bring up the most controversial things he's ever said, and then let's see what results from that, you know. So it seems a bit sort of like an artificial thing to have that approach and then afterwards say, well, I told you that's how it was going to pan out.
Well, I think that was the plan all along with Mythicist Milwaukee. Mythicist Milwaukee, that conference, it's been around for a few years, I think, and they were not making money. They were not getting attendance. A lot of conferences and big events are dying off in this country. And it's been a problem, and a lot of people are trying to like discuss what can we do different, who can we bring on. And I think Mythicist Milwaukee, like us, identified the problem, but they went about it in a way that I would not personally do. I don't think Sargon of Akkad anymore. And actually, and let me preface this, when we were first putting the panel together, I reached out to Sargon. And then Mythicist Milwaukee happened, and I can't work with that anymore. I cannot touch that with a 10-foot pole. So yes, I did not know who Sargon really was. I think I'd seen one of his videos on history years back, and I thought it was okay, but didn't know the kind of person he was or where he had become, or what even he was doing. So just knew he was an atheist on YouTube and thought it might be interesting. Of course, then learned everything, and yeah, can't touch him. But no, Mythicist Milwaukee, they wanted that controversy. You said they could have asked Sargon about atheism. What's the point? They were not, the audience was not there to hear Sargon talk about atheism. Thomas Smith didn't want to talk about Sargon's atheism. They wanted to talk to Sargon about the things that matter to Sargon. And that's, you're right. They should not have done that. In my opinion, they shouldn't have had him in the first place, because it's on mythicism.
Look, I agree with you. I mean, you're talking about you inviting Sargon to your event. I'll say this, I've said this several times before, that Sargon is an atheist on YouTube, but he's not a YouTube atheist. He's a political commenter on YouTube is what he is. His atheism is pretty much peripheral to that, you know. And it maybe from an American perspective, where atheism is so much in the minority, it might seem, but it's so every day in the United Kingdom that it's just, you wouldn't just invite somebody because they're an atheist to something like that. That would need to be something central to what they do, and it certainly isn't central to what Sargon of Akkad does in any way, shape, or form. So I thought it was, and it's not just that what you've said. I think a lot of people have tied in Sargon of Akkad as some kind of YouTube atheist, but I've never heard Sargon himself describe himself as that, and I don't think it's a sort of, it gets conflated with it, you know. Could I just ask you about Gary Edwards made the point. I know you watched Gary Edwards' video, and if anybody hasn't watched Gary Edwards' video, I'll put a link. I'll put a link to the conference website in the footnotes, and I'll put a link to Gary Edwards' video, because he had some interesting points to make. You said you didn't agree with them, but his point was that he feared that this event was going to be used, not by you, but by the people that are on this panel, as effectively a pushback against Mythicist Milwaukee, as sort of a snub your nose. You've had your moment, now we're going to have our moment in response to that. And some of the comments that I've seen from Steve, one from Foxy, I think, and a couple from Christy, seem to point to that. And that doesn't really seem particularly conducive with your stated goals. I mean, from my perspective, they should be talking about atheism and the advancement of atheism and things related to atheism, and steering clear of all this socio-political crap that too many of us, to our detriment, get bogged down in on YouTube, unfortunately. You know, but it doesn't sound like that's what's happening. It doesn't sound like that's in their mindset.
It's a valid fear, and it's actually one that has been brought to me by our own team. Like, is this the route we're really going? And I keep telling people, no, that's not the route we're going. That's not what we're doing. I understand the concern. I really do, because yeah, I could see actually some wisdom in saying, well, Mythicon did this, now we've got to go the exact opposite way. This was planned out before Mythicon. At least the bulk of our conference was. We've made some adjustments because of Mythicon. I'm not going to lie about that, but very minor tweaks. As far as this YouTube panel goes, it's going to be moderated by me personally, because I don't trust anyone else to do a good job on that one, and because it's so controversial, and because there's going to be, I actually expect a lot of people in that room that are going to be very upset with some of the people on stage, and I like to keep the peace, so people will be allowed to ask questions. I'm not putting a nix on that. Like, we're not just going to say, oh, they have the panel, okay, everybody leave. This will be interactive to a degree, in such a way that I deem is safe for everyone involved. I don't want any fights. I don't want any yelling. So we'll do the best we can. But they've all been asked to talk about what it is to be an atheist who promotes atheism on YouTube. That is the central theme of this. Now, I'm sure they're going to talk about some other stuff, and that's fine, because there are guests. They can talk about whatever they want to a degree, so long as they stay within the realm of, we're here to discuss what it is to promote atheism on YouTube. We're here to discuss what it is to be a YouTube atheist. And they're probably going to talk about some of their experiences in YouTube atheism. And hell, they might even name drop. They might insult some folks that you guys like, or even some of the people that are watching this now. That's on them. Yeah, I'm giving them a forum because I think it's going to be interesting. And I hate to say it, but I didn't really expect this kind of blowback. But the free publicity you guys are giving us, I couldn't. I'm so thankful that you guys are so interested in this. I did not expect it at all, but it is very welcome. So
yeah, I think, can I just say though, I think you need to be careful. I mean, I know the point that you made with regard to Mythicist Milwaukee was that you can drum up publicity and it can have a short-term positive effect. But what I don't want to see, right? I'll be honest with you now. Is not that I haven't been honest up to now, but
I hope not.
No, I assure you I have. But what concerns me is that it looks like you're putting together a really good event and a positive event. And I've heard you talk about it. I can see your enthusiasm and what you want to achieve. And it's all positive. And I'm feeling good about all of that. And I'm feeling good about the fact that you want to start bringing people together and get away from the polarization, right? Get away from that's occurred in really the last 5 years, and I think that's a necessary thing that has to happen if that's going to move forward in North America. But this just seems to go. This is going to work against that, I think. I mean, all right, there are some people whose backs you can put up, and it doesn't really matter because they're not actually that interested in atheism anyway. They're interested in the YouTube drama. They're interested in the social and political issues. They're not really interested in atheism. So that doesn't matter so much. But I think you're in danger of driving a bit of a wedge of people looking at this and thinking, yeah, well, that's judging the event based on where this is situated politically, right? That this is a little clique, or clique as you call it in the States, it's a little clique, And that's where it's all about, you know. And that would be a shame, that if that reflected on the event as a whole.
Well, that's the thing, is different groups are going to look at this through their own lens. Like the YouTube community is going to see the YouTube panel and focus on that. The more political community is going to look at our politicians panel. We're having a panel of elected officials that are open atheists from across all lines that we could find, which really aren't that many. And they're going to come out for that. They're going to be interested in that. They're going to want to talk about that, as well as some of the other speakers. They're going to come for them. So different groups are going to come for different things. And yes, I want the YouTube community to come. I would love it if all of you came, showed your supports, contributed to what we're doing, and of course engaged in meaningful civil discourse. I love good dialogue, and I'd like to see that happen. And I do understand that having Steve on board, and Steve and Christy and all them, who are, I know you guys don't agree with me on this, I think are absolutely wonderful people when you get to know them. I think probably all of you are. I understand the controversy. I understand that people are going to see this through that lens, that, oh, this is going to be some social justice warrior atheist conference that's a pullback to Atheism Plus. I was one of Atheism Plus's biggest critics. I thought it was terrible. I thought it was a mistake, and that's not what we're doing. And the only way I'm going to be able to prove what we're doing is after we've done it, after everyone's seen it firsthand. This is, yeah, we're going to talk about some social justice issues. We should talk about social justice issues that as they pertain to atheists. That's a no-brainer. And yes, some folks are probably going to want to talk about feminism. That's a no-brainer. That's fine on that panel. Like I said, it's up to them what they talk about. There are other panels, there are other speakers, there are other events. So everyone's going to take what they want. But if the YouTube community really wants to be involved in all this, hell, reach out to me. There's a contact thing on our website, and it goes straight to my inbox. I'm the only one who reads it. So if you guys want to be more of a part of it, hell, message me, talk to me about it. I will engage with anyone. I'm that bored.
I mean, maybe some of this has come about from my perspective because you've got in touch with the people that you knew and got in touch with the people that you heard of, you know, and there are people like King Crocoduck that has said he would have loved to have been part of this. And it's let me be clear, I'm absolutely not against having Steve Shives on this kind of panel. And to me, it would have been quite wonderful to have had a panel with centrist characters like King Crocoduck on there who have disagreements with Steve Shives. But none of those were the thing for me is that it seems like the thrust of the whole conference is that this is a time to shelve some of those, and we can have differences but put them to one side. It would have been quite a positive thing to have seen a more mixed panel that has these differences and not feel the need, you know, to have laid down their arms just for a fucking hour and say, right, we're not gonna deal with them, we're not gonna make any snarky little stabs in the back, you know, we're going to discuss about our common ground. Maybe that's something that could happen for 2019. It was certainly something that I think would be a positive thing. Whereas I have my concerns about this, and it's not within my power to tell people how to respond to this. Obviously, I've got my feelings on all of it, good and bad. But I do think that a lot of people will look at this and view the whole event on the basis of how this panel has been picked, you know. And I think that's
and you actually make a really good point, and it's a thought that I've been running with for a while. Is if we get this right in 2018, and maybe some folks are going to, you know, put away their swords and maybe start talking a bit more, in 2019 I'll have more options. If we are successful in this, if people want to come out and engage civilly to have those meaningful conversations, then yeah, maybe we can actually do something to start bringing ourselves back together. But the foundation for that has not been laid. The wounds are open. Everyone hates each other. Everyone's angry. Someone other than me has to be able to lay down first. And I'm just going to set the stage for that to happen. And I hope someone will do it. And I'm going to keep asking people to do it.
Yeah, on all I'm not sure Steve's necessarily the person who would be on that panel. I mean, I think ContraPoints is on the panel now. Maybe Christy would still be prepared to be on that panel. Maybe the one janitor would, but I don't think Steve is.
I don't think you guys really know Steve that well. Like I said, he's been a good friend of mine for a long time. I know the guy really well. He is not the unreasonable asshole that you guys make him out to be. He's very reasonable. He's sick of being in everyone's crosshairs. He's sick of feeling harassed. He's sick of his wife being harassed. You can't blame him. That's where he's coming from. So maybe if the attacks were laid off a bit, maybe things would calm down. Maybe that kind of discourse could actually meaningfully happen. So that's the kind of environment I want to promote.
I mean, we may have to agree to differ a little bit on that, because when he makes the comments that he makes, on the one hand saying he's fine with punching Nazis, and then on the other hand labeling almost everybody, every man and his dog, a Nazi. I mean, this is a comment, and this isn't just coming from me, of course, with the Mythicist Milwaukee, and the Seth Andrews comments, and the comments from Matt Dillahunty, etc., about Sargon of Akkad, but then about these other people who are totally hyperbolic about it, calling everybody a Nazi, saying he's going to be a Nazi. They're talking about Steve. Yeah, so they're talking about there, you know, and
Dan Earl.
I don't think that's helpful, because you can't. How can you? I heard one of the discussions you had with Steve, and Steve said himself, and you agreed with him, about tackling issues and not individuals, you know, and not being personal. But once you start calling people Nazis and racists and informing people that they're pro-rape and that they hate women, when these things are manifestly not true, it's hard to have a conversation while that's going on.
Well, I'm sorry, but folks on the other side have been calling him a cuck or a beta and a list of other ad hominems. Yeah, there's been mudslinging, and yeah, it's on both sides. I'm sorry, it is. Yeah, Steve has called a lot of people.
Of course,
I've asked him though. I've asked him about the punching Nazi thing, and he is not pro-violence. He does not want to go around punching Nazis. That's more of Dan Earl's thing, and Dan's a whole different. I got to say, at some point in my life, I would love to put Sargon of Akkad and Dan Earl into a cage and just watch what happens, just for my own personal amusement. I think
maybe 2019.
Yeah, maybe we'll see. Would love to see that, but yeah, Steve is under attack, and when people are calling me or slinging mud at me, yeah, I'm going to call them all kinds of shit. And yeah, if I think they're doing something that reminds me of something horrible, yeah, I'll call them Hitler or some other like dumb thing. But it's all out of anger. As far as Steve goes, yeah, he actually does see, and I don't agree with him on this. That's a lot more comparisons that are probably there between some folks who, yes, have said some really racist shit, have said some really sexist shit, and that doesn't necessarily mean you are a sexist or a racist or a Nazi. It means you made a sexist or racist statement, and you need to retract that. You need to do something about it because you said something fucked up. And if you want to be a decent human being, that's probably not how you should operate. But Steve is more like he's less forgiving than I am. So maybe, if, like I said, if folks stopped attacking him, he might stop attacking them.
Well, we'll wait and see on that one. Listen, it's been very nice talking to you. I don't know if there's anything else that you'd like to cover. I certainly wish your event well, because it does sound, when taken in a more holistic sense, to be quite an interesting event, an event that could be a positive step forwards, Lee.
I think so. I hope so. And to all of your audience, one, I apologize. I haven't showered yet. I look a little disheveled, so please don't judge me on my horrible morning appearance. And two, come out to TAC. Hell, and if you don't want to come out, support us, talk about us. Tell people that this is something that's worth doing. And if you have a problem with it, talk to me. Contact me. Like I said, there's a contact thing on our website. You can go there right now. I will be listening.
Okay, well, I'll put those details. I'll put the details of the website in the footnotes so that people can go and have a look at the event. Thank you for talking to me, Lee. I'll stop the broadcast now, but if you just stay on the line, we can say goodbye.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thanks for watching, everybody. Now I can't find where my mouse is. There we go.